there, and welcome to another very Christmassy episode of Untitled Film Podcast with Callum and Johnny.
Did you forget?
No.
You're
pausing for effect.
For dramatic
timing,
effect.
Things that you don't have. Timing, pathos.
Are you saying that I don't have timing and pathos?
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, pathos isn't really something that you need for a podcast, though. Pathos is more like a performative thing.
You do need it. It is a performance. Would you say when you listen to the Archers on the radio that's not a performance?
Well, yes, but that's a narrative fiction. This isn't. That's what I'm saying.
If you say so. I mean, you reviewed Speed Racer in a positive light, so that's
But I guess
not a real thing.
Yeah, that was a performance, I suppose, to some degree. I mean, I did have to add a little sugar to that to make my to sell the thing. Same with Batman Returns last week. I had to add a little bit of spice,
Wow. Anyway, the one with no pathos is Callum.
Yes, I am.
And I'm Johnny.
Yes, he is.
Welcome to this week's episode.
Yes, welcome. And this will be our final. We've done will have done three Christmas episodes. So
we've gone two are out. Two
are out, and this is the third one. So please do make sure to go back and listen to those. Those are really fun.
Just to remind you what they were, we had our special one with Dog Brain Video.
Yes.
With a slightly incorrect voice. Sorry to Dog Brain Video, but he was too loud. Which we reviewed.
Jingle All the Way,
and Falling for Christmas with Lindsay Lohan.
Yes, the latest masterpiece,
new movie of the year. But we'll talk about that more next week in our review of the year.
Yes.
And then last week we talked about alternative Christmas movies, and me and Callum each picked a movie that kind of has something, maybe a tiny couple of granules of Christmas in there, but aren't very Christmassy. And we looked at Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
And Batman Returns. And I think those were two movies that were sort of special, a little bit special to us, things that are quite important to us. That's why neither film was new, because we wanted it to be something kind of special for that particular episode.
Absolutely. And this week we've got, again, maybe a slightly left of center is a long word. Slightly left field choices. One is and one isn't. We've gone for kind of family stop motion films you can watch at Christmas. One of which is a Christmas movie, and one of which is new. We talk about this week Pinocchio, first off, and then later on the old movie will be The Nightmare Before Christmas. Many people's favourite Christmas movie, I think.
It's a favourite for a lot of people, certainly.
It absolutely is. So that is what we will be talking about this week. But before we do that, Callum, where can people find us on the internet?
Well, we are on Facebook and Instagram, Untitled Film Podcast, one word. And you can download this podcast and anywhere that you get good podcasts, like when they say with books, anywhere you can get a good book. Anywhere you can find a podcast is where you can find us, Untitled Film Podcast with Callum and Johnny.
And what about... where can they, what's the other social media platforms can they find us on?
Well, I guess technically we have a Twitter. I think there's one post on there, and someone, and I still hate this person, took the name Untitled Film Pod, because you can't have a longer title than, I think, 15 characters. So Untitled Film Podcast was out, so I went with something like Untitled with C and J, and
maybe we'll be able to change it soon, because Elon Musk is making the tweet. Have you seen this? Elon Musk is going to make it so your tweets can be 4,000 letters long.
Yeah.
So maybe he'll let the titles be longer, because...
Well, technically 4,000 characters, because that includes spaces.
Oh, yeah, well, whatever.
Nitpicking.
It's still mental. Still defeats the object. What does he make? A microblogging site? What is he going to be? Tumblr? How big are the posts? How long will your feed be?
Or Substack or something?
Just bloody essays on there.
And people are going to rinse him. They're going to make fun of him. They're going to find ways to use that as a way to take the piss out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be. I'm enjoying watching the world laughing at Elon. Or booing him like they did at the Dave Chappelle show.
Yes, I
heard. Full on Dave Chappelle as well.
Yeah, really
like Dave Chappelle, but he's
what a lick spittle.
He's going a bit weird now.
What a boot lick.
Anyway, on from that piece of cheery news, I think we need to move into the second part of our podcast, which is the real news of films. No, I
Stop doing that.
I've resorted to needing a fire lighter so I can light Callum on fire if he sings.
And there are opportunities at both films. One of them, I wouldn't say is a full musical, but it has songs. The second one, of course, is a musical.
Cool. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Anyway, you can go first, although if you take my piece of news, I will be upset with you.
Oh, if you've got a biggie. Well, no, I'm pretty sure I haven't got your news today because the one I chose was a little bit personal because this is a TV show that I love very much. So we both are aware of the HBO Max fucking up. I mean, we're talking about Twitter fucking up.
You better not have.
This is another service that is fucking up. There's a show I love.
Okay, good.
Called Minx.
No, you have.
Oh, have?
I was going to be a wider point, but you do yours and then I will put that out for it.
Almost completed filming the second season when they decided to cancel it. And now the showrunner, Ellen Rappaport, and Lionsgate TV, who is the people who put up the money for Minx, not the distribution, obviously, because that is recently was HBO Max, and now they're scrambling to find a home for this place. You can't even watch the first season. They've removed it. It's gone. You know, other than torrents, it does not exist anymore. And now they're scrambling around while still filming this final week. So everybody on the cast and crew, Jake Johnson, Ophelia Loverbond, the whole gang are really, you know, they're trying to remain in as good spirits as possible. They're putting out these posts where they're, you know, Instagram posts of them kind of enjoying their day on the set. Jake Johnson put out quite a nice thing for the cast and crew, talking about how hard they're working and stuff like that. But there is a sense, that tinge of fear that it might be gone forever very soon. It's really well reviewed, really spiky, really funny. I watched it. Really good TV show. So hopefully I'm really, really, really pulling for it to find a second home. Netflix, pick it up. You know, someone pick it up. Someone, like they did with Tuca and Birdie. You know, they had to scramble as well when they lost their home. And eventually, I think it was Adult Swim. Adult Swim might be a good place, although it doesn't usually. That's more animated. But you know, someone please find a home for the show. Roku, anyone. Roku's desperate. They'll hoover anything. They won't even ask for money. They'll do it for blowjobs. They will. So someone pick this show up, please.
So, yeah, that was one of my pieces of news. It was so in a wider context, actually. So it was on HBO Max in the US, although yes. I think it was on maybe another channel or something actually on TV over there. And this is another casualty of this Warner Discovery merger that I've kind of talked about already quite a lot on the podcast. And where there's been initially there was a lot of animation, adult animation. There was also the kind of cancelling of Batgirl, the movie, and things like that. Part of it is obviously them bringing in James Gunn and stuff and trying to get a bit more of a foothold and a bit more control in that whole space. But they've also done some really weird things on HBO Max this week, like they've pulled all of Westworld off of there. So it was a big thing a few weeks ago. They cancelled Westworld, I think 4 seasons in. Massive cliffhanger at the end of the last season. It still seemed to have a show that had quite a good, or maybe not as it did in the first couple of seasons, but still had quite a reasonable...
It certainly still had its respectable audience. It still had that following.
Yep. And they just pulled the whole thing off the service, and it's only just finished recently. Like you said, Minx, and they ordered a second season. It was 90% in the can, and they've cancelled that. And there's been quite a few other kind of medium to largest shows that have just been pulled off of there. Now, what's happened when they've done this previously is they've written them off. They've said, well, these aren't making us money, and then where do you find them? Now, yes, on things like Westworld, that's not too bad because there'll be Blu-rays out there and people can torrent it and stuff. But when it comes to smaller shows and things, it's interesting to know how. And again, it's a wider theme through the whole of streaming. there's probably shows from when Netflix first started up that, like, is Lilyhammer still on there? I don't know. It might be, it might not be. But there's probably shows from when Netflix started up that maybe weren't massively popular. And I suspect that the rights, and I've definitely seen it with documentaries and films, the rights are probably lapsed and they've not rebought them. And then they kind of go into some limbo unless someone else buys them up cheap. So it is quite a weird thing. It's that whole kind of thing that people used to always say when they first started downloading music off iTunes and things, when they were like, well, we don't physically own it anymore. So what happens if the computer breaks? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And the same with people with their digital photos, and if they just keep it on the computer, not having the tangible physical thing. Who owns them? How do you own? How does it? It's when you're effectively renting something long term, and someone can always call that renting back in. Whereas if you've bought something, then that's yours. They're never going to erase it from history. So it is a weirder, wider point. But yeah, this Warner Brother Discovery merger continues to be an absolute shitter for anyone who actually likes things and watches things and cares about art, and just seems to be money men moving numbers around on pieces of paper trying to... I think they maybe have over-leveraged themselves by merging the two companies and now put themselves into a bit of a spiral. And yeah, they don't seem to be doing too great. So
it seems to be just a massive shit show.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Maybe in the accountants' heads it makes sense, but and again, I suppose it comes back to us as consumers of art. When something costs $100 million, it probably ceases really to be art in a lot of ways and becomes
just a piece of commerce, just another product.
Effectively, which is depressing, but true.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's the way of things at the moment.
It is indeed. But yes, so that was my wider point that Minx was on it. I can't believe that was a piece of news that you picked.
Well, it's just because I'm a big fan of a lot of the cast. Ellen Rappaport I've been a big fan of hers for a while. Jake Johnson, I'm a huge fan of, as you know. So as soon I was looking at their Instagram accounts, going, it looks like they're having a grand old time. Actually, I'm going to have a look on Wikipedia to see, just to...
Cancelled.
Yeah, exactly. And it said, as of December, this has been cancelled. What? I just went on their Instagram. They're having a grand old time. They're posting pictures of themselves eating ice cream and pointing at the camera going, what a wonderful cast. What do you mean it's cancelled? When?
Wow. Much to think about.
It's like I stumbled into a parallel universe or something.
I know. There's been a few of these recently where there's been quite shows that you think are successful that have been cancelled, and you're like, well, I wasn't expecting that one. When the axe came down on Cowboy Bebop's head, I don't think many people were surprised after the reviews it got in the first week. But when the axe comes down on well-reviewed shows that seem to have a fairly loyal fan base, because you don't really expect shows to have 20 million people watching them anymore.
Especially not on cable channels or on streaming services.
Like Mr. Robot got 4 seasons with about 2 million viewers, and I can't imagine that was a particularly cheap show to make. So
no, certainly not.
So yeah, no, it's a weird one, and fuck Warner Brothers and HBO.
Yeah, fuck them.
Well, actually, no, don't fuck HBO. It's not their fault. Fuck Warner Brothers Discovery and the merger of them, and that ties nicely into my point last week about fuck off what they're doing with DC.
Yes.
I feel like in the show we've got certain boogeymans, and Warner Brothers, since this Warner Brothers Discovery merger, is becoming one of them.
It is.
Along with Elon Musk.
Along with Elon Musk, James Corden,
Johnny
Depp, Zach Braff, but more in a jokey way. Because
I actually don't mind Zach Braff.
No, actually, me too. I'm perfectly okay with him, but he sort of became the stand-in figure for our teenage angst and the filmmaker who represented that teenage angst. And now It Just Speaks to Me Man film is kind of thought of as a Zach Braff film.
Yeah. But anyway, we were going slightly off topic there.
Yes.
Let's move on to our second pieces of news. So as you stole my piece of news, I'm going to go...
Go ahead.
I actually did bring a backup piece of news. So I'm going to go with... Let's do Spider-Verse. So there has been a new Spider-Verse trailer, and it looked amazing.
Incredible teaser trailer.
Yeah. Well, it's the second one, isn't it? There was a teaser already.
There has been
which didn't show a huge amount, admittedly. This
that's what I'm wondering too. It shows more, but what it doesn't show, and what usually happens, is these are very. This is usually where the plot-based trailer comes in. And this is not a plot-based trailer.
No, it's not. There is not a real plot, is there? There's a little bit. You get glimpses of what I assume are the bad guys.
I mean, he's going into the wider Spider universe, and there's more of them, and there's an antagonist within there.
And the mixes of the animation styles look fantastic. It looks really cool. I'm still not 100% clear on why it was delayed. It was meant to be out this year. And actually, I was reading quite an interesting thing on Cartoon Brew today, kind of wrapping up the best films of the year and the winners and losers of the year. And they were saying how, I mean, Sony are useless at just life in general, I suppose. But but talking about how Sony had no real major animated films this year because Spider-Verse got cancelled.
Of course.
Sadly, Illumination was the most successful studio of the year in animation.
Well, they're always going to be because of how they operate.
Yeah.
Make them cheap, sell them high, factor hard on the toys.
And whack out 3 a year.
Yeah.
In fairness, Minions, I haven't seen it, but it was meant to be good. I
thought it was all right.
I like The Other Guys, which was DreamWorks, but it still comes under the same umbrella of Universal. And what was the other? There's another one that's coming out now that Illumination did.
Illumination!
What have they done? It's something that's coming out. It's meant to be really good. Puss in Boots. There's DreamWorks actually, but yeah, same group.
It's got very good reviews.
Really good reviews.
Yeah.
Shockingly enough.
I know.
So yeah, but yeah, Spider-Verse. Very excited. Go watch the new trailer. I think you will be excited too. Your second piece of news, Callum.
Well, this kind of goes into copyright law, which I know is very exciting and everybody loves a bit of copyright law news. But do you remember a little while ago you put out one of your bits of news was about that Winnie the Pooh horror trailer?
Yeah.
And they could do that because Winnie the Pooh is very recently, I think as of last year, went into the public domain.
Yeah.
And so long as they don't stick him in that red T-shirt and have him do that voice, which is very much Disney's version, you can do whatever you like. There's going to be a Winnie the Pooh prequel in the works and tell me if you're aware of these massive overperforming studios, Baboon Animation and IQI Media.
Okay.
You've never heard of them, but the name you'll also not hear of is Disney, because they got no part of this. And that's because this is what happens when things go into the public domain. All the tiny little studios that have no piece of any pie start scratching for the table scraps and kind of putting out, it's like Dracula, like every studio in the universe has put out a Dracula movie or whatever it might be, not necessarily Frankenstein or something like that. So long as you don't step on the certain look of Bela Lugosi or the neck bolts and the green skin of their version of Frankenstein, anyone can do it. And that's where these kind of tiny little studios, and I always love this, you can always tell when something has just gone into the public domain, because suddenly all these cheap, rubbish, kind of shitty versions start putting out like our Winnie the Pooh and like get tiny little crumbs off the table.
There was something else actually that I saw a press release from them studios that I didn't bother to read their names, and they said something along the lines of that they've had something else that's gone out of the public domain recently.
Is that horror version?
Yeah, another horror version of something else.
They did do another horror thing, and I can't remember what it is, but a similar vein. But
yeah, they just seem to be a theme that's coming along. I did wonder with Pinocchio, as there were 2 this year, but I feel like that may have just not ever been in a public domain. It might have just always been a public domain.
I think it's always just been a fable, so I don't think it has any grounding.
Although they all seem to be, yeah, exactly. I think that quite possibly is the case. Cool. And my last piece of news is that they will be doing a US remake of Peep Show.
Really?
For the 5th time.
Really?
Apparently they've tried to remake Peep Show 5 times in the US and failed every time. Not all of them have got as far even as pilot, but it's failed 5 times. And they're having attempt number 5, but it has got some interesting people behind it. The kind of showrunner exec producer is a producer on Atlanta and also on What We Do in the Shadows. And it's going to be on FX. I feel like Shameless was on FX, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and that was one of the.
Was it Showtime?
No, you're right. It is Showtime, and but it's still a similar type of studio.
Yeah, I think if it's going to work anywhere, that's the kind of one that could work on. But it's quite a British thing. I feel like it is a concept that you could take. You could like the idea of doing that behind the eyes thing's not really been done on a US show in the same way that when The Office came out in the US, that no one had really done that kind of cinema verite kind of.
And now it's then it became everywhere.
Show, even if like the show doesn't really make sense that it's got it like Modern Family.
And there's been a recent huge success from a British remake. And did you know that they remade Ghosts in the US?
Ghosts.
It's
the kids show with the guys from like Paddington and stuff in it.
I mean, this show is not a kids show, but it is from the people who made Horrible Histories and Paddington.
Yeah, it's like a family show. It is aimed at families.
It's about 12 rated. There is some sort of cheeky jokes in there. Like it has a Tory politician ghost who isn't wearing trousers because, of course, that's how they died.
Yeah.
So, and they never explain it. They never get crude or crass with it. But the fact that he's a Tory politician with no trousers on, it is kind of all you need to know. So it's that sort of PG.
For anyone who don't know or maybe our American audience who don't know, the Tories are the Conservative Party in the UK,
yes they are.
and they are, I suppose, are Republicans.
Yes.
And there was a big thing, and there was a spate in the 90s where there was a lot of like sex scandals and things like that came out of them, and they were obviously meant to be holier than thou. Family values.
I mean, for anyone who has a Republican or a right, whatever country you're listening to this to, whatever right-wing party that you have.
The ones that always tell you that you're morally shit, but then are found out to have embezzled loads of money and doing cocaine off a prostitute.
Exactly.
They're the ones, yeah. So yeah, that's what the joke is. But no, I know that. So yeah, that makes sense that would work possibly in the US as well. Do you know something else that they've remade?
What's that?
Do you ever remember a show called Murder in Successville?
The name rings a bell, but I don't think I have, no.
So there's a show called Murder in Successville where they would basically they put a celebrity with all these people who are acting, and the celebrity had to try help like solve a murder in this place called Successville. Heard of that. And Will Arnett's remade it in the States called Murderville.
Yeah. So on Netflix?
It is on Netflix.
I think I've seen a trailer for that.
I've watched the first few episodes. It's quite good. It's not as funny as the British one was, but I'm hoping maybe the second season gets a bit more going.
Hopefully.
But yeah. So that was my second piece of news. And I think that brings us nicely on to talking about the movies of the week. So, Callum, think so. Remind us, what is the first movie we're going to talk about?
The first movie is, drumroll please.
No.
It's Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. But
hang on, didn't we already review Pinocchio once this year?
Well, we certainly did. Earlier this year, there was the Disney Plus released Disney remake of their version of Pinocchio. One of their live action remakes with Tom Hanks as Geppetto. We thought really good things about it, didn't we? Oh, absolutely. I think what score did we give it? Did we
Maybe
give it
2 or 3?
I think it may. Yeah, I think it was a 2. But this is something that will come into play with both movies because there's a famous director at the helm of both of these films. But they're not the only people on board. And this film is called, the official title is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Mm-hmm. And next film, if you look on any poster, it's going to say Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. But this is co-directed by a man called, Mark Gustafsson. Mm-hmm. And he is someone who has more of an affinity with directing stop motion animation.
So probably effectively he was there doing the day-to-day and Guillermo would turn up occasionally and go, make it look like this or make it do this.
Maybe he had a push on the sort of broader sweep of where the story went and was more of the story and acting director where Mark was more the animation. We can't know for certain.
No.
But yes.
It is interesting because obviously it's stop motion. I don't think we've said that yet. But it's an interesting thing that you get these big name people attached to doing these stop motion movies, and I think 90% of the time they work on the script, they get the voices recorded, and then from that they probably do some of the production design and things. But after a point, it's such a slow and long process. It takes 3 or 4 years. They go off and do 1 or 2 other projects while they're doing it.
Guillermo's had a second project just this year. So he can't have been fully on board. So his day-to-day may have been more of a producer than as a director, but he probably did get involved when he could in direction. So he's probably directed enough of it to warrant a credit. I don't want to sort of suggest that he was completely
it's hard.
It's hard to know.
What is a director when it comes to something like, is getting a voice acting or getting some people acting in front of a green screen and then letting the visual effects people do the majority of the work after then. Is that, how different is that from someone who doing a voice role and being heavily involved in the script and the production design, and then watching the dailies, or probably not dailies with stop motion animation, probably monthlies and things, and at what point do you take that away from them? But no, it is an interesting point. There was a lot of stuff around Tristan Oliver talking about Wes Anderson after the first one of those stop motion movies that he did, the Fantastic Mr. Fox, and there was some big arguments and stuff around that, and it was he and how he did it. So no, but anyway, go ahead. Tell us a bit more about the story. So for those that don't know about what the story of Pinocchio is.
Well, if you're not familiar with the classic tale of Pinocchio, it's a father and son story with a slight twist. In this one, Geppetto, he's grieving. He lost his son. Because probably the big change that this movie makes, and I imagine that this was a Guillermo take because he's touched on similar subject matter before, is that it's moved to the early 20th century during the rising of fascism in Italy, and Geppetto's son is killed when several planes drop a bomb on a church that they've been working on, because Geppetto works with wood and he's been working in a church making a figure of Christ. They leave late, bomb drops, and it kills his son. And one night he drunkenly, while grieving, crying for his son to come back, he chops down a tree where I forget which insect he is. He is
grasshopper.
No, cricket. Jiminy Cricket. Sorry, that in the name is
grasshopper. Same thing.
And that's where that character comes into play. Jiminy Cricket comes into play. He enters the life and ends up being the mentor to the wooden boy that Geppetto makes in his grief.
And this tree,
out of this tree that he chops down, and comes to life when the blue fairy brings life to this wooden doll in order to help Geppetto get over his grief. But of course, that road to getting over grief is not quite so easy. And I think the big changes, other than the fascism angle, is that it's a lot harder for Geppetto to come to terms with this, because usually, as we saw in the previous one, it's very much, I'm so happy a boy has come to life. In this one, he does not want this boy. But anyway, those are the two big thrusts, the big two changes that have been made here are in those aspects. So before I tell the people what I thought of it, Johnny, what did you make of Guillermo del Toro and Mark Gustafson's Pinocchio?
It was considerably better than Tom Hanks's and Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio.
Yes, indeed it was.
It did something interesting with the story. It kind of kept the main two or three elements, and then around that rebuilt it into something much more interesting, I would say. I would possibly even say it was more interesting than the original Disney animated one from what I kind of like as a style. It was very dark in places, to the extent that Mussolini is actually in it. I don't think that's too big a spoiler.
It's not. I mean, given that it's when it's set and where we are in the world.
And there's some quite darkness. He's not particularly dark in it, but he, that kind of thing is quite dark. Quite an interesting reimagining of the fairy as well. Is it sand fairy they call it in this one? But quite an interesting reimagining of that and their role, and some quite interesting takes around death that aren't really in the original. I say the original because obviously the fable, but around the other two. Really enjoyed the animation style. It's done incredibly well. It's not the most exciting stop motion animation I've ever seen. I think some of the stuff that came out of Leica Studios is maybe more interesting, like Kubo and the Two Strings. I really have a soft spot for Wes Anderson's and what he does with the weird kind of hair on the things that he has as well. But yeah, I thought the animation was incredibly well done, and very well lit and very well put together. My biggest single criticism is it's about half an hour too long. It's got 2-hour runtime, which is quite a long time for a family movie. And there is points in it where I'm like, get on with it. Come on. And they've added some other characters and some other storylines in which I don't think have the emotional payoff that they hope it does. And maybe by trimming those, and again, I don't want to tell too much because we don't want to spoil this one. But yeah, I think that that's my kind of biggest dislike of it. But overall, it's a very interesting take, very well put together, and I enjoyed it.
I would agree with pretty much everything you said, actually. I think we're very much on the same page here. The length is an issue, and I think that does come from slightly, although it is a very interesting aspect, and it works very well, because they've added a whole new plot thread of it being set in Mussolini's Italy and the rise of fascism, and there are several new characters, as you alluded to, that come from that. So there's a father and son character who's a fascist military leader, and his son who he keeps on kind of bullying to be a man, be more like me. And there's a whole new side story that comes out of that. And at times there is a slight tension between the telling of the original story of Pinocchio and this new thread. And while it is very interesting and it's familiar ground for anyone who's familiar with the work of Guillermo del Toro, he's very concerned about rising fascism. He's told it several times in Pan's Labyrinth, The Devil's Backbone. It's an area that he's certainly wedded to. But there is a slight tension, and I don't want to overstate this as an issue, because like you said, the main issue that it adds is that it adds about half an hour to too much of screen time, and it does mean that rather than have one boo hiss villain, which usually in this story is the circus ringleader who persuades Pinocchio to sign this contract and basically steal him away and turn him into his puppet, which he is a puppet, but his literal puppet.
But he's a real boy.
He's a real boy. So you get two villains, both kind of trying to knock heads to be the main villain, and it sort of creates a slight vacuum where neither one is the main villain, and they both come across as slightly ineffectual side villains. But the main thrust, the area that it explores of grief, is very moving. And I found all the work of David Bradley, who voiced Geppetto. He did voice Geppetto, to be incredibly touching.
Yep.
Ewan McGregor is very good as Jiminy Cricket. He has that lilting quality to his voice, and there's a very good recurring gag, because of course everyone knows that Ewan McGregor has a beautiful singing voice, and he keeps starting to sing "My Father Thought," and then something happens. In fact, on this podcast is what happens. Someone shuts him down anytime he tries to sing.
Yeah, but the difference is you don't have a beautiful singing voice.
I don't have the voice. If only I had the voice of Ewan McGregor.
Wow. If only we had many of the talents of Ewan McGregor.
Yeah, well, quite. Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you. But no, it's funny. It's engaging. The animation is good. But I think another point you touched on, which is very astute, is that it's not as exciting stop motion animation as Laika. It's not as fluid. I wonder how purposefully jerky it sometimes is. It has a sort of classic, more Rankin Bass, like a very, 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 very polished and very, very high budget version of Rankin Bass, but it has that very earthbound quality rather than Laika, which moves into different worlds and sweeps into new areas.
If I'm honest, I thought it budgetary. I didn't think it seemed like a style choice to me.
Okay.
More because I just don't think it was lit as well. I don't think it had as many of the, take all of that stuff out, even compared to the second film. We're going to talk about the way it's kind of lit and put together.
Yeah. It's certainly, I feel like competently done.
It's incredibly competently done.
Without
good.
necessarily.
And I was incredibly impressed by the faces and the way that they did the faces.
Yes.
And you didn't really, on a lot of stop motion I've seen recently, you see the kind of lines around the faces,
seams where they slot in different
mouths. Didn't really see that too much and things. So that stuff was done well, but yeah, I just didn't. I was quite intrigued as well. There's actually a featurette about the making of it on
presumably on Netflix.
On Netflix, yeah. And there's quite an interesting bit, and they had really giant puppets to have it next to Jiminy Cricket and stuff, which I don't think normally happens in stop motion when you have a
usually
very small
they're about
character.
action figure sized, those kind of characters.
But they have ones that the head was like 5 times the size of a real person's head and then had a Jiminy Cricket next to it for certain perspective shots and things. So I wondered if they were trying to do different things in that way and different things with false perspectives and stuff. And in the process of doing that, maybe had to simplify things slightly.
Yes, possibly.
But yeah, so I don't know the exact reasoning, but yeah, I did think that was, I don't know, it doesn't really detract from it. The story's told incredibly well.
And
but maybe it just didn't have that sparkle.
I mean, whatever reason, the animation is kind of nailed to the floor rather than going off into these extreme worlds and universes and flights of fancy. It does make for a very moving, personal, human story, even if it was for budgetary reasons why they had to stay on the ground than creative decisions.
Yeah. The honest answer is I don't know why it was chosen to do it like that, but I did think it was something. There was something kind of lacking. He knocked it. I did think there was something possibly lacking from it, but no, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a worthwhile watch. It's definitely one of the better animated films of the year, and it's if you're going to watch one Pinocchio movie this year,
if you have to watch one,
make it this one.
Exactly. It's also nice to see some of Guillermo del Toro's usual cast member mates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Ron Perlman, okay, yep, come back. And David Bradley as Geppetto. Yeah, absolutely.
David Bradley was good in it, actually. I like David Bradley, actually.
Me too.
Anyway, on that, I think it's time for us to stop for a advertisement break. And whatever they just said to you, buy it. That's my advice. Anyway, on to movie number 2. What is movie number 2 we're going to speak about this week, Callum?
It is a story long ago, told only in your dreams. And I can't remember the opening monologue. That was going to be so good, but no, that was shit. Sorry about that. Rob, leave that in. It's The Nightmare Before Christmas.
It is The Nightmare Before Christmas. So, I suppose I've got to tell you about this one.
Yes.
So, The Nightmare Before Christmas, there's this dude, and his name is Jack Skellington.
Tell me more about him.
He is a skeleton, I should say, and he lives in Halloween Town, I think it's called. And he's not the mayor. He's just like he's like the spiritual mayor, the de facto mayor, even though there is actually a mayor.
He's kind of just the cool guy.
Yeah, he's like the Fonz of the town.
Yeah.
He's the guy that goes around and knocks the jukebox and the Monster Mash starts playing. That's his vibe. And he is the guy that organises every year Halloween for the whole world. And he goes with his motley crew of peeps, goes around and creates Halloween around the world. And then one year after Halloween, he's having a little lament. The song's actually called Jack's Lament because this is a musical. And he's going around and he's walking around a graveyard and he notices a door that he's never noticed before. And he falls through it and he falls into this pile of snow. And he's like, what's this? And then there's a song that goes, what's this? Multiple times. And he goes around and he sees all these Christmassy things and he gets excited and goes back to his town and says, there's this guy called Santa Claus who has big claws. And he goes around and does all this shit in December. And I think we want a piece of that too. Let's get rid of this Santa Claus guy and let's do our own Christmas. And we'll make it bigger and scarier than any Christmas ever before. And then that goes on from there. That's the plot of it.
It's good one.
And what do you think of Nightmare Before Christmas, Callum?
Well, this is quite an enduring classic. It was just necessary to say that it's flawless, but it's one of those films that you watch it every year, especially people our age, because we were the right age for the sort of Tim Burton nostalgia. I mean, we weren't goths or emos ourselves in secondary school, but we knew people that were. We were friends with a lot of them.
They had bags.
And they always had that bag.
Yeah.
They had that bag. You know the bag that they had. And
from Americans, I'm sure they get it from Hot Topic. From people from Gansby, Third Eye.
Absolutely, yeah, Third Eye. Bit of local humour there.
Yeah.
Very local. And, and there's a good reason why it is. It's a very enduring musical. The songs are, excellent for the reasons that they are excellent. It was one of the pioneers of stop motion animation. So while it wasn't the first by any means, it was amongst the first of that type and budget and distribution to be put out on, in a major studio by Disney. It's one of the first big hits of stop motion. In fact, it was nominated at the time. This is how old-fashioned it was, for the Best Visual Effects Oscar, which they give to animation films, when they do something for the first time. They gave the same Oscar nomination to Toy Story when it was a marvel to have CGI animation. It mixes 2D animation, 3D animation, little bits of 3D animation with the stop motion just to kind of paste over the cracks. And it positions itself excellently because it does become the film that you watch either at the end of Halloween, somewhere in November, somewhere before Christmas, because it's about that transition from Halloween to Christmas. Is that sort of weird feeling.
2.5, 3 months,
exactly,
isn't it, of watchability.
And that's why at Disneyland, Halloween, when Halloween comes around, it's taken over by the crew. And it's excellent for all the reasons that you remember it being excellent. It's a good musical. Like on its own, the musical numbers stand up as just good musical numbers, rather than what we usually get in animation where it's sort of the idea of, well, it's good for it's an animated musical, which is to separate it from real musicals. Whereas I think musical snobs do include this film as a musical.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to know A, how many copies of the soundtrack they've ever sold, and B, they did an album where they got multiple famous stars to do, most of them either emo bands or people like Marilyn Manson, to do covers of the songs and things. So you don't get many. You don't see Moana, as good as Shiny and stuff is. You don't see them getting a pop version of all those songs, and people still probably. I can't imagine people are going to be listening to all the songs from Moana in 30 years' time. Maybe one or two, but like all the way through, there's 4 or 5 songs in this that people still listen to.
Well, exactly that, and that's something that's kind of only really reserved for very respected musicals. It's not perfect. I think that. I remember a few weeks ago when we did that making up our own movie drinking games, and you pointed out that Sally is sexually harassed quite a lot in this film. And I was watching it today for this, and it's not just sexual harassment. She's bullied, she's gaslit, she's ignored. And then the Lothario hero who ignores her for the whole movie comes along and swoops in and says, "Actually, I do fancy you." And, that does leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth. The musical numbers are all good, but some of the singers are not, because it does a funny thing. Chris Sarandon plays Jack speaking voice. Danny Elfman plays a singing voice.
Which is, you can tell.
And you can tell.
It's 2 people.
They do not sound alike.
No.
But it's good because it's a musical, so... the more important thing is the musical numbers. And to get someone who is actually musically accomplished... it's a good idea, but Catherine O'Hara for The Best Will in the World is a little bit wobbly. Paul Rubens is a little bit wobbly, and then you have people who are clearly musical singers, like I can't remember his name, but whoever plays Oogie Boogie. Oh, this is the business. And when Danny Elfman say, "Oh yes, here we go," but sometimes you get actors singing, which is like they're fine.
Which is fine if they're Ewan McGregor.
Yeah, if you're Ewan McGregor, but if you're the guy who plays the mayor and you can barely hit the right key, then that's a problem. And there are issues with, while it is a pioneer of stop motion animation for all those reasons I mentioned, like it's brilliant, it's amazing. Like you said before, sometimes in stop motion you can see like seams, and this is very much
the mayor's face is the worst.
The mayor's face is, you can see where they slot in.
He's getting a lot of
he's getting a lot of
hate from us. The mayor,
fucking mayor, fuck that cunt. But a lot of a lot of slotting in of eyes, a lot of neck seams popping out, a lot of strings on display. But, that's to be expected in the film. It's 1993, I think it was. So
and it was pretty
almost
low
30
budget.
years. Exactly. So I don't want to slag that off too much, but it is sometimes noticeable. Yeah. But it's because this film is very good, so you kind of have to go for the nitpicks.
Yeah, I really like it. It's one of my kind of 2 or 3 Christmas movies that I'll watch every Christmas. Pretty much without fail. Something it gets very right is brevity as well. It's an hour and 20 minutes.
Not
Brilliant.
even.
Yeah.
It's about an hour and 17 or something.
Which is perfect. It gets on with the story. It picks a story. It goes with it. It's often with musicals, they'll do the musical bit and then they'll tell you everything they told you in the musical bit afterwards, and then add an extra half an hour in for the musical bits. Whereas this, actually, the music felt very integral. It's integral to it, and it tells the story and tells you the characters and what they're thinking. And works really well from that point of view. I actually think the animation in a lot of ways is better than a lot of stop motion that comes out now. That I was particularly like the Christmas lights on the buildings. I was really impressed how that was all done.
So pretty.
I really like the character design. So obviously Tim Burton produced Nightmare Before Christmas, did a lot of I think he wrote the whole script, didn't he? Or was heavily involved in the script?
Wrote the
story guy.
He wrote the story because it was based on a poem that he wrote.
And obviously did a huge amount of the kind of character design. They're all those kind of like spiky, what they would call probably, they call them Tumblr sexy men now kind of style. That kind of style of drawing is very very kind of him, very Tim Burton and stuff. So you could tell the character design. And then later on, obviously, he did that one with Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, The Corpse Bride. And obviously the animation techniques and things have moved on hugely since then, but actually the character design does not look as good in my opinion. It looks a bit OTT and a bit flat, yeah. It kind of somehow manages to be over-designed and under-designed at the same time, whereas I feel like this is really perfect. And that's actually one thing, with Pinocchio, I didn't really like the character design that much. Pinocchio's was okay, but everything outside of Pinocchio...
I thought Pinocchio was serviceable, but that nothing more than serviceable.
But I did not like Geppetto's look. I thought it looked like a China Christmas ornament and stuff. And I don't know. I didn't like whereas this, I just think the general design of everything is really good. Just little things like Oogie's kids having the bath with they go and wind up at the back and the little feet that move and all that kind of stuff. So no, there's a lot I really like about it. I do think there's some, I think the Sally character is the way it's written is incredibly misogynistic, and I don't think you get away with writing that 30 years later almost. I probably written in the late 80s, early 90s as well, because obviously it takes a long way to make. Yeah, of course. I think there are some cracks in it from like the voice acting and musical acting. I actually think some of the voice acting I'm not that a fan of. I think some of it sounds very kind of like almost like an anime dub at points. Like some of the voice acting is quite...
Jack's speaking voice I've always had a bit of a problem with, because he just sounds so different, and it's very much like, I'm actor man. Hey, Sally, what are you doing here?
Yeah. And also like Oogie's kids, the way they sound, two of them sound over the top and one of them sounds really flat. And so I think there are issues like that don't maybe gel together. But again, like you say, other than the misogyny, maybe it's not nitpicking. But outside of that, I think most of what we're saying is nitpicking. I think it's a very tight film that gets on with its story very well, has great music in it, and is the set design and the production design is fantastic. And of its time, it was one of the best.
I think that's one of the only times I've ever heard you say, it's a good movie. Could have done with being 15 minutes shorter, which is something I think I've heard you say at every single movie ever made throughout the history of it, the entire history. Every time we come out of the cinema, that was really good. Yeah, it could have done with being about 10 minutes shorter, but yeah, it was really good.
I know, I'm just an editor in my head. I'm always like, just make it shorter, brevity. I got bored in this bit. If I have a rule in a film, if I start thinking about something else in the film, then it's not doing something right.
There's only one moment in this movie I do have that moment, that kind of thought. It's after when he introduces the song where he introduces Sandy Claus to, like, and the ruler of this town is Sandy Claus. And then there's about a 5 to 10 minute gap where he's pondering a bit, and he's going, what's up with this Christmas thing? And Sally breaks out of her owner's house, which is also a slightly creepy part
I suppose
of it.
It's Frankenstein.
It is. I know, I understand that. And there's about 5-10 minutes where they just seem to be going, what's Jack up to? And Jack's like, what's Christmas about? And that's always the point. It's like, right, cup of tea time, I think. Let this play on in the background and get the cup of tea. But that's, again, very nitpicky.
There's still a 3 out of 5 song in there, and there's still
it's stuff going on. It's between the two songs.
I thought there is a song. I thought it's the one where everyone in the town's going, what's Jack doing? What's Jack doing?
But that's when it starts up again.
Right,
but
okay.
It is it's a 5-6 minute, which for a 70-minute movie is quite a long stretch. And that's the only kind of bit where I go, right, time to make a cup of tea, I think. But, again, these are tiny picks. It's just so that we can be objective as best as we can.
Exactly. But no, great movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's on Disney+. If you have seen it, watch it again, because it's Christmas.
Yes.
So why aren't you watching it again? Excellent. So I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode.
Don't bully the audience. Well, I shouldn't talk. I call them time-wasting parasites.
Yeah, I don't think that's bullying. I think that is a good
Just suggestion. Yeah, no.
Anyway.
I can't talk.
Pinocchio. No, scores, numbers on the doors.
Numbers on the
doors.
7 out of 10, I think. It's really solid. It's not flawless. And there are kind of structural elements that I would change. But unfortunately, those structural elements are ingrained in the film because of the decision to change its setting, and which I think brings a better overall positive. So you kind of take the baggage with the good there. But it does have odd flaws here and there. So I think it's very well animated, although it's more grounded than it is fantastical, except for in certain places. Voice acting is very good. The story's very moving, very touching. It is too long by about half an hour. And again, you take the good with the bad because they bring in that new leg of the story.
They could have cut it down a bit.
You could trimmed it a bit. They probably could have. But I think...
Even 15 minutes.
It brings some baggage with it. And unfortunately, you get some good, you get some bad, but the bad does knock a point or two off it. So 7 out of 10 for that.
Yeah, interesting. I would agree pretty much on all of that. My biggest issue is it's half an hour too long, which is a long time to be too long in a kids' movie. I still think you could have got the scissors out and cut it down, even with moving it to 1930s or 40s Italy, which I actually think is a positive.
Overall, that's very much a positive.
And yeah, I thought that worked. Voice acting was all great, although there wasn't, I don't think, a single Italian person in it, which is sometimes... Depends how you look at these things.
I prefer that they're keeping their accents though than doing
that,
shaky
100%.
Italian accents.
It's me, Ewan McGregor. I am a criquito. Yeah, exactly.
Except for Christoph Waltz, who I don't think was doing his original German accent.
I think, if anything, he was just toning his German accent down a little bit.
I think he was doing something.
Because I obviously every time you hear Christoph Waltz, you're like, oh, that's Christoph Waltz. And I was like, is that Christoph Waltz?
It did take me a minute.
I got it straight away, but I had to think about it. But yeah, that was good. I'm not convinced on the production design. Some of it was excellent, but overall, I actually really liked the Cate Blanchett character's production design. But outside of that, I wasn't that excited by it. Actually, quite like the car playing rabbits as well.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Basically, that whole part of the world, but I wasn't that interested in the grounded world. But I don't necessarily think that's because it was grounded. I think it was just that I wasn't that interested in the way it was designed. And yeah, overall, though, very good, much better than the Disney piece of shit that came out earlier in the year. I probably would, because I don't think the original Pinocchio is a perfect animation either, so I probably would put it on par with that and probably says a bit more socially. I also will give it a 7 out of 10.
Yes, I think we're very much in line here on today's episode.
Exactly. And then The Nightmare Before Crimbo.
I think this is I was wrestling between two scores, but I think I'm going to settle on 8 out of 10. Really well animated. Brevity is key. It's a pioneer, and whatever tiny nitpicks, Sally aside, they are nitpicks, and they're not huge gaping flaws or anything like that. There's a reason why it's iconic, both as an animated film and as a musical. There's a reason, much like last week when we talked about how Batman Returns had earned its stripes as a cult film amongst certain kind of gothy teenagers of its day. This very much has the same sweep. You can understand in the same way why there'll always be people going to the Rocky Horror Picture Show dressed in character. There'll always be people who go to as Sally to Halloween, or there's a reason, and it's because it's very much earned its stripes as a cult film because of how beloved and how well structured and how fun and how good the musical numbers are. So yes, good old solid, dependable 8 out of 10.
Good, excellent. I agree with pretty much all the points on that. It works very well on every level. Most of the things that I dislike, like you say, nitpicks, little issues with the voice acting, little issues with the way the voice acting is connected into the story, or the music even. And the biggest hole for me is the whole Sally thing, and it being a bit like, now. And I feel like it's still probably some of it is a bit inexcusable for 1993 in general. It just seems creepy. But hey ho. But yeah, so that's the biggest thing that takes 1 point away from me. But overall, it is still one of the dons of Christmas movies. It's one of the dons of not just stop motion animation, and it's it's got a cult status for a reason. So I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Lovely.
So we've given Pinocchio 7 and Night Before Christmas a 8.5 between us. So both films to go and cuddle up with the family and watch before Christmas. Pinocchio maybe with maybe a little bit scarier, but yeah.
That's a siren going past, if you can hear that in the podcast.
Exactly. Anyway, and that, I think, brings us to the end of this episode. And I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas. And we will be back with a end-of-year review before the new year.
Something to look forward to.
Thanks a lot. And
bye.
I'm not doing it. Bye. Bye.
Long ago, told only in your dreams. And I can't remember the opening monologue. That was going to be so good, but no, that was shit.